Welcome to AB Decodes or Arjun Bhagat Decodes. And today we are talking about Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir and POK. Now, there is a lot of discussion on it, a lot of heated discussion. There has been a massacre in Belgaum, a series of incidents over the last 75 years since India got independence and Pakistan laid claim to POK. To understand the entire narrative of POK, its history, we've got a very, very interesting person, Raghavendra Singh, who I would say is the quintessential intellectual, a person who has excelled in the field of culture, in media. He's an author. His book, India's Last Frontier, did really well. And also, incidentally, he was in the hallowed Indian Administrative Service and was Secretary Government of India with a number of different ministries that he looked after. Welcome to AB Decodes, sir.
Thank you, Arjun.
So my first question to you is about Kashmir, about the history of Kashmir, the dynasty, the Dogra Dynasty. I'm asking this question because the narrative of Pakistan is that Kashmir, and I'm calling it Kashmir rather than POK, I'm talking about it as a whole entity. They have been laying claim to it since 1940, when the two-nation theory was propounded by the Muslim League and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the very fact that it was a Hindu dynasty. So give us a little bit of a background about that.
You see, at that particular point in time, when it came to partition, and it was decided that these 566 or 565 princely states would either align with Pakistan or either align with India. There were a couple of prominent states, say for example, Hyderabad. Now, Hyderabad had a Muslim ruler, but an overwhelmingly Hindu population.
Right.
So was Junagadh. And exactly the opposite prevailed in Jammu and Kashmir,
Right.
which had an overwhelmingly Muslim population, but it had a Hindu ruler. Now, I'm afraid when in 1840s, especially after, the Sikh kingdom was trounced by the British,
Yeah.
and this area was sold by the British to the princely ruler of Jammu,
Right.
Gulab Singh.
Right.
1846 was the Treaty of Amritsar,
Right.
and around that time there was the Treaty of Lahore. And so this whole process was gone through. A British historian who was in the service with the British Army, etc. of that time, he wrote certain things which were not really palatable, and he ended up losing his job because he said that the whole thing was done in a very unethical manner. The place taken and the amount spent, the Anglo-Sikh Wars which had taken place. So the background of how this particular piece of territory came into the hands of the Dogras doesn't really make for reading which is really praiseworthy, so to speak. But nevertheless, the fact remains that it came in the hands of the Dogra rulers.
Right.
And over a period of time, the British actually kept very, they had a hawk's eye on Jammu and Kashmir because being a world power, they were very mindful about the strategic aspects of this swathe of territory, which actually bordered China, Russia, and Afghanistan. So they were very mindful of that. And as late as 1935, you see, they decided to take away around 1/3 of that piece of territory into their direct administration, which went back to them in 1947, to the Kashmir Darbar in 1947. And these people, the ruling dynasty, were so unprepared to keep that territory back that it lost it in no time. It lost it within 3 months' time of it coming back. The Gilgit agents.
Yes, of course. So let's talk about Gilgit and POK and how Pakistan, put out a military kind of a force out there. The tribals from I think the Baluchistan side, the marauders, the Kabalis as they were called. But there's a history before that as well. In 1940, in the Muslim League, one of the meetings there, they actually laid claim this whole place and said that this is going to be part of Pakistan. Right? I mean, of course, the entire ramification of that, I don't even think Pandit Nehru or Mahatma Gandhi understood it at that point of time. And this is where the entire two-nation theory kind of started, coming into play and then taking on a life of its own. So the two-nation theory, recently Asif Munir, the general in the Pakistani army, the chief of the army staff there, he talked about the two-nation theory, right? He talked about the fact that our religion is different, we are Muslims, our culture is different, our background is different. I mean, to reinforce the idea of Pakistan, how do we as Indians see that in the context of what then happens in POK?
So to start with what you said about 1940, perhaps you are referring to the Lahore Resolution
Yes,
of the Muslim League.
right.
Now, you see, we should go back to the phenomenon of Jinnah, how Jinnah rose. Now, Jinnah had a very checkered career till the time the Second World War started. So much so that people in the Muslim League would also not take him seriously. They would actually, the regional rulers, say for example in Punjab or in Baluchistan or Kalat or Bengal, they would not take him, they would not take him really seriously. But then the arrogant person that Jinnah was, he said that I created Pakistan only with the help of my stenographer
Right.
and my typewriter. And, he was not quite incorrect, because there were a lot of cross currents that were in existence, about which a lot of people who were prominent leaders within the Congress and outside it were not really aware. Because the Britishers were playing both the communities, as they have been doing subsequently. I mean, the Western Pla bloc, they would play these two communities for their own advantages. So, 1940, it's a bargaining tool for the Muslim League. They could actually, and anyone should ask for the moon, because if you ask for the moon, you get something perhaps less than that. But if you don't ask, you don't get. So they ask for anything and everything.
I mean, they asked for
Population.
any majority area where the Muslims were, they wanted their own states.
But this two-nation theory, Arjun, you must realize, is a theory where you basically, what you try and do, you try and polarize
Right.
the communities. It's very easy to polarize the communities. Right? And the Calcutta killings of August 1946 and thereafter the communal Vesuvius, which erupted in India, is a prime example. Whereas anyone or any set of people who are opposing, you see, this kind of an effort of polarization, it becomes very difficult for them
Right.
to maintain amity.
Right.
Because the whole feeling, the innate feeling, the primeval feeling of human beings is to be impulsive.
Right.
And the moment you have incidents which are communal in nature and people get killed, so the natural reaction is to sort of withdraw and take strength from a conscious collective, be it Hindus, be it Muslims, be it Sikhs, anyone. So this is what actually Jinnah thought was a very easy strategy to adopt.
Right.
And Congress, because Gandhi used to helm the affairs in Congress, was one person who said, no, we are going to be absolutely secular in our approach. But you see, it's very nice and fine to say that, but in actuality, was he able to prevent these communal incidents from taking place? To an extent, yes. I mean, if he went to Calcutta or if he fasted, it would automatically, the incidents would come down. But everyone was not Gandhi, you see. So it became far more easier for the British to play Jinnah and his cohorts and, provoke and egg them on into asking, and then over a period of time, inch by inch, they gained in terms of their bargaining power. And finally, on 3rd of June 1947, they ended up asking for partition, which was approved by all the parties concerned, including the Congress.
Right. So, I've always wondered about this. What was in the interest of the British to actually divide India on the basis of at least one part of it on the basis of religion, where you had, West Pakistan and then you had East Pakistan? I mean, just in the context of this entire, that debate can go on, and that it is a really long answer, but just give us a short idea about what were the British officers, Mountbatten, what were they actually thinking? Was it all because of the friendship that they had with Muhammad Ali Jinnah? I mean, it sometimes defies logic that here is this country and you suddenly agree to partition large parts of it. India as an entity was huge. It was the crown jewel of the British Empire. And then before the British go, they pretty much decide, okay, let's sever its the hands, so as to say.
You yourself said it was the jewel in the crown. Now, you've been in a country which has made actually your country.
Right.
See, all powerful. You've taken all the monies from here. You've completely destroyed the contribution which India made to the world GDP. You've destroyed that. And in consequence, you've sort of aggrandized your country, right? Now, this is going. After Second World War, you realize that this is going. In 1857, you had a lot of Britishers killed. Right? Now, that situation forever troubled them. And as they came nearer 47, they started really obsessively suffering from the fact that if something on those lines happened, and if the British Indian Army betrayed them, they would all be killed. So the idea was to have a grand scuttle,
Right.
the hurried scuttle, which actually started taking place. So everyone knew after the Second World War that they are going. They knew it. No one wants, if you are asked today to leave the house in which you stay, and you've stayed for 200 years, wouldn't you feel bad?
Yeah.
And if you are being forced to leave by another party, would you feel very nice and benevolent towards that party? No. So the idea was that, okay, we are leaving, but we are going to destroy. This is one thing. The second thing was that when their headquarters from Delhi was to now shift to London, then they realized that there are in between from Delhi to London, there lies a swathe of territory where they, including the Western Bloc, which included America also, had a lot of strategic interests like oil, etc. So, therefore, they found that Pakistan, if it got created, would be a much more malleable instrument to play with rather than India. So, they knew that. So, Pakistan had to be created.
Right.
Balochistan was independent.
Right. And they promised it as an independent country.
Yes.
Right.
Northwest Frontier Province had no communal problem. It had a Congress ministry on 15th of August 1947.
Right.
Right? Then there was no POK in existence. In Bengal, you see, at the 11th hour, those people were actually ready for a united Bengal.
Right.
If that ever came into existence. Sindh, one didn't know where Sindh was going. So what were you being left with? Only half of Punjab?
Right.
But the British decided, and Jinnah forever was willing, because then his name would go down in history. And so he was the front man, and they cobbled up all the states, different provinces, and created. So it's if you read the documentary evidences, it's crystal clear that the British created, because British were allowed that kind of a leeway in South Asia. They were allowed by the Americans to do whatever they wanted, and they did it. So they created Pakistan, from where they would then operate much more easily in terms of looking after their strategic interests.
Right. So, Maharaja Hari Singh, who was the erstwhile ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, he declined the request by India to accede to the Indian Union. And then in October 1947, the Pakistanis launch an attack to occupy POK. How did that unfold? And who were the key players at that point of time? Of course, we have Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, we have Sardar Patel, and we've got Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Who were the key players? And in terms of strategy, putting together a surreptitious kind of a plan to go and take over large parts of J&K, including Srinagar. How did that unfold? And were we caught napping? Was India caught napping? Of course, we were a new country. We just got independence, but so did Pakistan. But they seem to have got their act together as far as this is concerned, much before us.
So to answer the third part of your question first, was India caught napping? Yes, India was caught napping to an extent that all the heads at that time, whether it was the Army Chief of India, which was a Britisher, whether it was the Chief of Staff of Mountbatten, Ismay, who was himself defense officer. So they are on record to say that India had absolutely no intelligence, even at the beginning, and understandably so, because that was a part of a princely state.
Right.
But then if India was mindful of its strategic interests as British were, or as the Russians have been, or the Americans, then they would have, or they should have.
So let me put
They did not have it.
So let me put this question to you. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, was he that naive to assume that everything would be hunky-dory as far as Jammu and Kashmir was concerned? The Pakistanis would not lay claim to this huge area or would not invade this area, even though they had made their stand pretty clear. And throughout, from the Lahore, declaration, we have the 1940 declaration, the Lahore Declaration for the Muslim League. In 1943, Sheikh Abdullah actually aligns with the Muslim League and pretty much says that this part of the J&K state should go to Pakistan, or, part of the two-nation theory. No, we have that in record. That's when he actually aligned his entire thinking, even though earlier he wasn't that close to the Muslim League, but then he comes together to it. So with the history of all that, we are still not prepared, and we pretty much expose that entire state to the Pakistanis taking over.
You see, this is the tragedy. The tragedy is that Nehru, Patel, and the top Congress leadership was absolutely aware of what was going to happen.
Right.
After 15th of August 1947. And they were aware of the urgency to take action. But this whole thing about this two-nation theory and trying to resist that two-nation theory, so they strategized, and it is there. They are writing to each other, and they are writing to each other with a sense of urgency. And they say that, no, the only way we can fight is not through the Maharaja. We can only fight the Pakistanis through Sheikh Abdullah. So Sheikh Abdullah needs to be immediately released from the prison. So Sheikh Abdullah gets released end of September 1947 from the prison. And he is thereafter immediately made the head of the emergency administration of Jammu and Kashmir, because that's how. So they are aware, but where the problem lay in that delay which took place. The Maharaja was not going to release him because he knew that if he released him, that was his problem. That if he releases him, if India comes in, then Sheikh Abdullah comes in. So I go anyways, right? So he, though, wanted to align with India, but he did not want to align with Nehru, who was propping up Sheikh Abdullah. So this is where the delay took place. And thankfully, believe you me, we should actually thank the Kashmir state forces, which actually withheld the onslaught of the tribesmen when they were coming along the Uri road, and they withheld them at Uri, thereafter near Baramulla, by which time the airlift had taken place.
Right.
And Because otherwise, if the Srinagar airfield was gone, there was no way to get the Indian forces in. And what happened to Baramulla would have happened to Srinagar. So yes, I mean, to that extent, the Indian leadership of that time actually took it to the wire, so to speak. It was that last cricket ball run which made them retain Srinagar. Otherwise, Srinagar was also gone.
But it was an operation which was conducted by the Pakistani army and its political leadership. I just want to make that very clear. Because we're talking about the tribals. That was the disguise, so as to say. Right?
Yes, of
Because,
course.
there were some apprehensions about whether the Pakistani army should directly get involved in it. So then they created this rouge. And then these people come in. But then let's also talk about the role of Hari Singh. That was a pretty selfish role, right? Where he actually thought he could continue being the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir.
You tell me which ruler. You see, the rulers don't come to rule because democratically they get elected. They are there because they're there.
Right, absolutely. And so it's self-preservation. No, I understand that.
Self-preservation, but he could have earlier declared the same, I mean, accession in India's favor. But as I told you, see, that accession was coming with the package of Sheikh Abdullah.
Right.
And he obviously didn't like him, not from now, but from 1930s, early 1930s.
So give us a background about Sheikh Abdullah.
Now, Sheikh Abdullah, you know,
And his family is still there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Umar is the chief minister right now. His father, Farooq Abdullah, is a very well-known, been chief minister so many times. So that, of course, that family dynasty continues. I mean, just for context to our audience here.
Okay, so Sheikh Abdullah's rise to prominence starts in early 1930s.
Right.
And if you see the role which he plays in opposing the rule of Hari Singh between 1930 and 1934, you will find that the support which he is taking is completely communal.
Right.
Subsequently, when he comes into contact with Nehru, right, and realizes that if he goes with Jinnah, then Jinnah is a Muslim, this whole place is overwhelmingly Muslim. Therefore, his prominence as a leader, as a sole leader of Jammu and Kashmir would not be there.
Right.
And so he decides in his own interest that it is better to align with India. But throughout, I find that his role vis-a-vis Hari Singh, his role during the time of creation of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute with Pakistan, there are flashes of brilliance in terms of leadership. And at the same time, his role is very anomalous. He gives lot of opportunities to say Britain, or the way he conducts himself during his speech in the partisan speech which he gives in the United Nations around early February, I think 5th of February 1948, which gives these people, the Americans, the Canadians, the British, all the opportunity to say that if you have a plebiscite with Sheikh Abdullah heading the administration, it is not going to be fair. I mean, why give that chance? So he was doing all this basically to see that his own position was safe. He got into a problem with Hari Singh and Meher Chand Mahajan, who was his prime minister, and saw them out at a time when what was the whole idea? I mean, they could have taken Hari Singh along. I mean, Hari Singh in any case was being gradually driven to the wall.
Right.
So why do you have to humiliate him and then throw him out? So obviously they were doing it because, number one, Nehru had been imprisoned by Hari Singh in 1946, and also the fact that Abdullah had been imprisoned, whose case Nehru took. So both of them at that particular point of time formed a united front against Hari Singh.
Right. So let's talk about this whole conflict and the tribals, the Qawwalis coming inside POK, occupying large parts of it. And we send our forces down after Hari Singh acceding to India in that sense. which are the areas that we lost? And would you say that even though the Indian army had moved in, the Pakistani army, its formal units were not anywhere close by, we were premature in pushing them further back?
It's not as black and white as it looks. You see, we had a situation where the army chiefs of Pakistan and India were British.
Right.
They were they came out of the same womb,
Right.
so to speak, the British womb. Then there was a supreme commander, which is again a British.
Right.
And over him was London.
Right.
Right? So, it was a scenario where they would actually close the tap or force you to do anything they wanted.
Yeah.
They could actually limit your supply of petrol. They could limit your supply of arms and ammunitions. One usually thinks that, you remember that 55 crore payment on which Gandhi actually had gone on his last fast, and then
So now
right,
that in our discussion, yes.
yes. So I then subsequently discovered that that is actually not the fact.
Right.
From the recently released documents, you see, about 50 brand new aircraft supplied by the British, right, actually landed in Karachi and were held back by the Pakistan government till we paid up.
Right.
So there are various ways and means and political interest.
So I understand all that, but I'm still you're trying to figure out what our leadership was doing under, and especially the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. I mean, here was this statesman, he'd become Prime Minister, he had great relations with the British government. I mean, they were Mountbatten and he were the best of friends. And then he...
Mountbatten knew.
Right.
Before, now this is not known. Now I have documents, which I recently again discovered. I have documents, letters written by the Commonwealth Relations Office to Mountbatten before we went to the United Nations, that look, we are really going to embarrass the Indians once they come to United Nations.
Right.
Right? So you forced them to come to United Nations. So Mountbatten forced them, and we went and we got embarrassed there. Now,
but that was a decision that Jawaharlal Nehru took, that he wanted to go to the United Nations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he could have said, I don't want to go to a third party.
Yeah. You see, when British like Mountbatten is shown as a friend of India's or as a friend of Nehru's, that doesn't mean he was a friend. He was actually essentially a British. He was a British serving officer who knew if there was a formal war, he would be withdrawn by the British back to his country. So he was actually doing the bidding of the British, like the way anyone like Francis Muddy or George Cunningham were doing the bidding of the British in Pakistan. So anyone and everyone who was part of the Indian or Pakistan setup who was British were doing not our bidding or Pakistan's bidding. They were doing Britain's bidding because of the global politics which was going on at that time. So we were completely waylaid, we were completely misdirected, we were completely ill-advised.
No, that may be the case, but at the same time, the Prime Minister, in this case again, Jawaharlal Nehru, he has to share that blame of not taking the right decisions. I mean, even by taking the entire conflict of POK to the United Nations in January 1948, he internationalized the issue, right?
Yes, of course.
I mean, if we hadn't taken it, and what was the locus standi of Pakistan? Even today, they keep harping about the United Nations, that United Nations needs to step in and it needs to solve the problem. There has to be a plebiscite. And that's another question I wanted to ask you. Where did this whole idea of plebiscite come in?
You see, when the accession was taking place around 26th of October 1947, then the British, through Mountbatten, insisted that this accession will be provisional and the will of the people will be ascertained later. And this is what Nehru says. Immediately after the accession, he writes to the British Prime Minister and says, look, our army is moved in, but this accession is completely provisional, and we are going to have a process by which we are going to ascertain the will of the people in the fairest of manners.
Right.
Right? So, to my mind, what was the point of saying all this? There was no point in saying all this. Obviously, I mean, I agree with you on this. And also, Hari Singh later says in February, when he finds himself totally irrelevant, he writes. He writes to Patel because he couldn't write to Nehru because Nehru was completely rabidly anti him. He would call him names that he's a foolish man, he's an idiot, he's this.
Jawaharlal Nehru would abuse
Abuse
Hari Singh.
Hari Singh. So he wrote to Patel and he said, look, if this is what the situation is right now, and since the accession was provisional, I'm actually going to withdraw it.
Right.
What is going to happen? As it is, I'm made irrelevant. And if you are agreeing in the United Nations to a situation where things may transpire that this whole state will go to Pakistan, then I might as well withdraw the accession from you all.